Hi, welcome to our live broadcast of the Parrot Literary Corner brought to you by New York Parrot. Today we have Cindy Frenkel, whose The Plague of Tenderhearted was recently released from Finishing Line Press. Her poetry is forthcoming in the anthologies Divining Dante and Poets Speaking to Poets, Echoes and Tributes. Her Remembrance, Galway Kennel, and the Blue Button Down was in the Southampton Review. She served as a writer in residence with InsideOut Literary Arts Project, which brings working poets into Detroit public schools. Her essay, Sharing Voices Acting Crazy, is in the anthology To Light a Fire. Her writing has appeared in numerous places, from Vanity Fair to the New York Observer, where she was a columnist. She also served as the writer and editor for the Detroit Institute of Arts magazine, a Hambridge Fellow. For the past 12 years, Cindy has taught college. Her essay, 15 Lessons from 9 Years of Teaching, appeared in Writers and Education. She is involved in animal rescue as well as suicide awareness and prevention. You can visit her website at www.cindyfrenkel.com. Thanks for joining us on the show today, Cindy. How are you?
Well, Dustin, I want to thank you, both of you, you and Mutiu, your producer, for inviting me. I'm grateful to be here.
Well, we're grateful to have you, and we have an excellent interactive session today. If you guys want to leave some comments out there who are viewing and questions for our guest, or any comments you want to leave about the show, just feel free to drop a line on Facebook.com there at the New York Parrot. And so I'm going to start off with a question myself. So why do you choose to write about addiction, and how can you portray addiction and addicts sympathetically to erase the stigma?
Well, it's a wonderful question. Because the truth is that addiction is a disease. And if you talked about cancer and you weren't sympathetic to someone who had a cancer diagnosis, we'd say there's something wrong with you, right?
Right.
So I want to get the narrative out that addiction really is not a choice. It's a medical illness. And one of my brothers was a drug addict, and he died by suicide. And I want to get rid of that stigma, because that shame helped fuel his addiction, and I think really contributed to his demise. And that was such a small part of who he was also. You know, there were so many wonderful things about him that are what I remember about him. And what most people do, I might add, because he was wonderful and charming and off the wall, funny, and all sorts of terrific things.
Right. It's very difficult to cope with that as a person, and as a person witnessing it, and as a person dealing with it. It's very much a problem for for the family, for the community. And what have you found are the best ways on a personal level to cope with addiction in that process, and helping the person overcome that?
Well, it's been a circuitous route for me. The first thing I want to talk about is the connection between addiction and depression, because I had the wonderful privilege and pleasure of studying with Galway Canal, and he wrote a beautiful poem called Wait, about a student of his who was so depressed he was thinking of suicide. And we really don't know how much small acts of kindness can make a huge difference in someone's life. We do know that before COVID, every 11.8 minutes, someone died by suicide, and those numbers have only risen. And of course, addiction has only risen. And the two are inextricably linked. And in my book, the second poem is about just that. And it's about teaching literature in the classroom at Lawrence Tech, and weaving in the connection between what we're reading, between Virginia Woolf and Art Spiegelman and Mary Shelley. There was a lot of drug addiction in Mary Shelley's circle, and a lot of suicide. So these are topics that unfortunately are timeless.
Right. It's definitely part of the human condition. And so, how does a writer address suicide in a comforting manner that is both sensitive and true to the cause?
Well, I'm not sure that's possible, that it's going to be comforting. I think what
Right.
I'm more interested in is that it's true. And
Hmm.
in that authenticity, something resonates that might, in the best of sense, influence someone and change a trajectory. And I know that's really ambitious. But I think about 5 different things. I've been thinking a lot about this, knowing I was going to be talking to you about a heady subject and we'd never met. And I have a really good life today. I've done a tremendous amount of work on myself. I think therapy is really important and
Right.
any kind of support. I know a lot of people in recovering addicts who are doing tremendous work, who are sober 30 years out, who are friends with my brother. And, these different programs work. Um, and the things that I was thinking is once you've had, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Hmm.
So once you have food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, you have all the things you need in terms of the safety of your home and everything you need to live a comfortable daily existence. Then I think there are 5 things, at least I've found for me, that make life whole. And
Hmm.
one is intimacy. I always wanted connection, and I grew up in a family where we really didn't often have deep conversations. And I'm not good at small talk. There's a wonderful film called Lucky. I don't know if you've seen it. It's about a 90-year-old man.
No, I've
And
not seen that.
you have seen it?
No, I have not seen that.
I just saw it this past week. And I think his name's Harry Dean Stanton. He's a big actor. Was 90 when he played the 90-year-old. And he died right after. I think he was 90. And there's a line in there that he says, which is I might be paraphrasing it, but the only thing worse than awkward silence is small talk. And I love that. So
Fair.
I wanted intimacy. And I think in order to have intimacy, you have to be vulnerable. And in order to be vulnerable, you have to have courage. So intimacy, courage, and vulnerability are 3 attributes that I look for in people. And then for me, if you don't have humor,
Mm,
I'm
right.
not in a friendship with someone who can't laugh at themselves and laugh at other people. I mean, humor to me is vital to sanity too. I mean, to be able to right size things. And then the most important thing after those four categories is purpose. Because if your life doesn't have meaning, what's the point, right?
No, I totally agree with you, and I especially like the humor aspect. I mean, if you can't laugh at yourself, then what can you laugh at? I mean, we're kind of silly creatures in a lot of ways. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I even remember reading. It was either in Elie Wiesel's Night or Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I want to say it was one of those 2 books. It was a very serious book about the Holocaust.
Hmm.
And people got into the showers expecting that they were going to be dead. And instead water came out and they started to laugh. And
Right.
I think it is just, and I've noticed this time and time again, at points where I think I'm just going to break, something happens and I look closely and it's really funny and I
Hmm.
laugh. And Dustin, the other piece about it too, and I think the craft person, and a poet is a craft person, right?
Uh-huh.
Is really doing nurturing spiritual work, because
Right.
these are intangibles. I didn't write this book to make money. I didn't write it to change my career. I wrote it because I had to. And I really was hoping that it would make a difference somehow, putting my voice out there, because all of our voices are so important. Um, so I think that, like addiction, like depression, these are such widespread illnesses, and we need to air them. And we're living in a culture right now that's just so divisive. And I'm all about building bridges. A friend of mine texted me a photo, and I just loved it. It said, "Some people will only love you if you fit into their box." Don't be afraid to disappoint.
Right.
And
Totally.
I want to talk about things that sometimes make people uncomfortable. I'm not good at small talk. And I don't think being uncomfortable is necessarily a bad thing. It's how we grow. Being mean is a bad thing. Doing something intentionally to hurt someone or something that's dishonest or unethical, I mean, those aren't okay. But this is talking about real stuff. And I love that we're starting to reduce the stigma as a culture, with these difficult things.
I think science too has uncovered a lot of methods and realizations that have led people to a better understanding of what these things are. I mean, years and years and years ago, I mean, suicide was sinful, and you could get the death penalty in some cases for committing or trying to commit suicide in some countries. I mean, there was a severe stigma and
Wait, you
addiction.
can't get the death penalty.
I know, I've heard it's really bad. It's really bad.
It's too late.
I've heard that was part of the law, like way back. I think in
if you
England.
fail, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, or you would not be put in the family cemetery and stuff like
That's
this.
exactly right.
So that kind of thing, and I think that it's definitely very good that we're starting to recognize that that there's ways to avert this and these kind of crises, and we can do this as a culture, and especially with like addiction. I mean, that was kind of seen like if you were an alcoholic, that was just a personal issue, just to hell with you kind of thing. And I think that now we realize that this is something that we can help somebody with and develop a good, solid ethic for them and help them to develop a kind of a communal, atmosphere for them to give them support and with other addicts and other people that are suffering, and realize that this is a part of their suffering. It's not something that they necessarily choose, or it's not like free will, like I'm just gonna just go out and totally get wasted and waste my life away kind of thing. It's a very difficult thing. And I've had a friend of mine had an alcoholic brother who was a real good friend of mine, and he suffered, and it's really tough to see somebody go through that, and it's really hard to witness a person suffering and not sure what they can do to get out of that.
Well, there's the stem root that people say this a lot is dis-ease with that disease. And one of the antidotes is really that connection and intimacy. And if anything, one of the things that COVID has taught so many of us is how inextricably connected we are and how much we need each other. People so miss the human touch, coming over for dinner, someone just dropping by, running into a restaurant and sitting at a counter and having breakfast alone, but schmoozing with the people there. Just that connecting. And that's what I love about poetry is that, when I'm reading it or I'm writing it, I'm connected.
You feel a very deep human touch. I mean, and in poetry, another thing I like about poetry is the spontaneity of the language can be so, can get your mind stimulated in a way that a lot of other arts don't do it in the same way. I mean, language is like the very basis of who we are as people and reaching out to other people, and you can communicate so many things that are so outside of normal communication through poetry,
Yes.
And then you just feel it. There's an intuition there. It's like, you just, something about it, like it brings a calm to you. And is that your experience as well?
Well, they say that hearing is the last to go when you're dying, but smell is the sense of all the senses that is the most evocative. So if you smell like your mother made brownies growing up and you go into someone's house and the smell of brownies are wafting through the air, it's like Proust with the Madeleines, just the whole world will come back to you. But the thing about sound, and coming from Detroit and being a Motown lover, if you put on Motown, my body cannot sit still. I mean, you might not see it, but if you had Motown playing in the background, believe me, my legs would be moving. I mean, there's just no way I'm not going to sort of
dance,
elaborate in my way.
Right. Yeah, do a little dance, start getting motion going.
And, sometimes words are so beautiful, they're intoxicating. And other
Uh-huh.
times they're horrible and they're viscerally frightening. If you look at
Yes.
footage of historical times in history where dictators are speaking or someone is committing an atrocious act or violent act, and you listen to the sounds, they're really upsetting. Or in the natural world too, when an animal's killing another animal, that kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
then when you counter that with music or with a mother cooing to a baby or whatever, we have that same visceral response, and that's hardwired. I don't think it's something we
Yeah, I think so.
work on. You can hone it. I mean, I hope I've really honed what I do with words and continue to do so, but some of that's innate.
I think it's definitely true that, I mean, that's hardwired into us. It's biological. There's a root that it just strikes that, and poetry has the ability to sort of tap into that root. And I love the fact that you mentioned, like, the visceral, approach to when you hear, like, I mean, somebody doing something. I mean, like, if I watch on TV and you see, as you mentioned, animals killing each other. I mean, there's something that we just, as social beings, that just appalls us, that,
Yeah.
seeing the destruction and death, and the feeling that, I can imagine, like, watching, like, I don't know, Hitler or Mussolini or somebody give a speech, and just it hits in a way that's like you just very uncomfortable,
Whenever I see crowds, like masses of people, and everybody's in agreement, it scares me
Yeah,
because,
I feel the same way
yeah,
sometimes. Seeing people, there's like a hero worship there, that it's like very frightening in a way that, people giving their consent of their lives over to some persona per se.
it's interesting
Definitely.
too, thinking about that. I don't know how it ties into my book, but when you write, and you know this, you're
Mhm.
really voicing what it is about your inimitable experience in the world at large. And so it's a singular event, even though if it hits a chord, of course, it's a common one.
Mhm.
And I think that's completely counter to that mass experience. It seems like it's a singular event, but there's like group think, which is really creepy, right? Like the
Right.
Milgram, the Milgram
Yes.
experiment.
Mhm.
It's just, and I remember being I don't, this has nothing to do with the book. Well, maybe it does, but I remember being in a classroom at University of Michigan, and it was a large lecture, and the fire hydrant, I mean, the fire alarm, not hydrant, the fire alarm went off.
Mhm.
And the teacher kept lecturing, and everybody was just sitting there.
Wow.
And I just got up and went, "Excuse me, that's a fire alarm. It means there's a fire. I'm going to leave the room if anyone wants to join us." And then everybody left. It was so bizarre. But
Huh.
everybody was waiting for permission from the professor, and we didn't smell anything. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, pink flag, it's going to turn red soon. Fire doesn't take its time. It was so
Right.
weird.
It is
So,
strange.
but I think that's the same kind of to write this book. I had to really trust my gut, which
Uh-huh.
is not how I was raised. It's counterintuitive for me because I was raised where you don't talk about things, they're family secrets. We don't have problems that people can see. You
Right.
look good at all costs. And you saw the cover, right, of the book? Can I show it?
Yes. Yeah, sure, feel free to read, look at it. Really
Yeah.
nice. It's beautiful, beautiful
This is a
art.
portrait my dad did of me when I was a little girl
Oh,
that
wow.
was in my parents' library my whole life. And I had
Uh-huh.
a very complicated relationship with my father, and which is in here some, not completely. I just wrote another poem that is kind of the bridge to a longer manuscript from this. But as a woman, and I'm in my 60s now, it's
Mhm.
taken me this long to speak the truth. So talk
Right.
about, sort of a, I don't know, catch-all phrase, truth to power, but talk about that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? So, yeah.
Absolutely. So if you want to, we have some time for you to share a poem or two from the book, if you want to do
Sure.
that.
I'm happy to. I don't know which one or two, or you want me to do a few more than that? You tell me.
Let's just go with two. That's a good generic number.
Okay. Why don't I read tempted to read my very favorite one, which is a celebratory one, but I'm going to read the first two in the book because the first one covers a lot of what's in here. And it's called Things I Have to Forget to Fall Asleep. Just before evening's end, the list begins. 3 piles of laundry, like the mind, divided. The electric bill, that intrepid old Life magazine I've been meaning to. Churchill on the cover reminds me of Clementine, the sad oranges and arugula that need to be tossed. In New Orleans, tumbling churches, streets underwater. Another Malaysian airplane missing. My 3 cousins all horribly ill at once. An outbreak of honesty. Wondering when our time will be up. First my mother, then my brother. Slow sinking, rapid fire. First love, husband, marriage implodes. A love never to be found again. Still, it aches like a mad desire. The match that can't catch fire.
When is that taking place? When is that?
Well,
poem?
I'm just thinking how weird it is that it's the opening poem and that it mentioned New Orleans because that was obviously referencing Katrina.
Uh-huh.
And boy, does history repeat itself, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's
Just
very
wild. So my mother, what happened was my mother was dying when my brother relapsed. And he had been clean 13 years.
Wow.
And then he was a heroin addict. We couldn't talk about it. So, you know, I'm one of 4 siblings. We really hardly ever discussed it because we looked really good. We were overachievers. We were very generous to the community, kind, good people, but boy, shut down in that regard, you know?
Right.
And then
It's tough being that person that's in the family that's stuck with so many issues, you know, and it's hard to be that person, I think, from so many perspectives. I mean, if you have a lot of successful family members and then you're kind of the one that got stuck with a serious addiction or mental health issue that's got all the stigma around it, and you've got the, you know, the problem itself you're dealing with, it's really something to, you know, a heavy burden to carry.
well, you know, it's interesting you're saying that. Do you know who Virginia Satir is?
I don't remember
Was
her name.
she was a therapist who did a lot of work on families and addiction, and those are roles were assigned. Like and Sharon Wegscheider Cruz, who's alive, her husband was Joe Cruz, and he founded the Betty Ford Clinic, and he just died. She was a protege of Virginia Satir, and they talk about that model because that's really not. It's nice to be able to put someone in a box like that, but it's not really true because addiction's a family illness. And
Right.
actually, the more I look around me, the more I think it's a cultural illness. Because in our country, I know people who can never have enough stuff. They can never have the right car. A new car comes out, they get it. The next iPhone, they've got to have it. It's I this, I that. And that's so counter to what we need, which is community and connection, right?
Right.
And so my brother was really smart, but not in a conventional way. And he would have been a phenomenal comedian. He might have been a very good businessman, but he was labeled. He was really handsome too. So he was a ladies' man and a beautiful dresser. And he was labeled kind of the wild one. And I was the good one. I was the good girl because there were so many rules I had to follow. And every box I checked off. I was compliant as they could be. So this is really an act of rebellion for me. I had a cousin whom I adored who was a writer. She was the first feminist in the family. And I remember she said to me, and it's actually a line in one of my poems, but it's not in the book, "Stop apologizing for telling the truth."
Excellent. Yes, very true. Very
So
true.
the truth is, we have a culture of addiction. He wasn't the one, but he did get that label, and that was horrific for him. And the shame that it fed was horrific. So can I read you the second?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Second one, well, you know what? The second one is about being in the classroom and I had just published a piece. It wasn't my best writing, but it was solid. I mean, it was fine. And it was in the Detroit Jewish News. They bought it like that within 10 minutes of my sending it in. It was the quickest turnaround I'd ever had. And it was called My Brother and Kate Spade. And it talked about addiction and depression and suicide. And then I'm on a board called A Single Soul that's about education for suicide awareness and prevention. And I did a 3-day workshop, which I didn't want to do. I was really busy. I was coming back from a trip on the West Coast, and Dan Syme, who's a rabbi with whom I co-authored a book years ago, founded this board, and he spoke at my brother's funeral, at Tom's funeral. And the weird part about it was that he was a rabbi that didn't have a congregation. He had a different kind of job before. He came back to Michigan, where he was from, and was the rabbi for our family's congregation. So when he spoke at my brother's funeral, it was the first eulogy of a suicide that he delivered since his own brother's suicide years before. Mm-hmm. So we really bonded over that one. And then I also spoke. And it was a performance. I mean, I used to do a little theater, and I literally prepared as though I were doing a theater performance because I had so much PTSD. I was just in shock. Yeah. And there's more to that story that's in the book because there was a cover up. We said suicide, but people thought he overdosed. And in reality, he used a gun. We had an open casket. In Judaism, you're not supposed to do that. And it was in his head. And no one knew. I mean, he looked beautiful in the casket. So there was just a lot of trauma. So I wrote this piece after Kate Spade died by suicide. And then Dan Syme asked me to join this workshop. And I had just come back from the West Coast. I was exhausted. I was adjusting to the time change. And I said, well, maybe I can come for part of it. Is it so important that I'm there? And he said, yeah, it is. And I said, why does it matter? And he said, because you might save a life. And what can you say to that? There's no better answer, right? Like, fine, I won't sleep at all. There's no way I'm going to say no to that. So I took this 3-day workshop. Of course, I stayed all 3 days, and I learned all sorts of stuff. And one of the things that I learned is that when someone's depressed, you're supposed to ask them outright, are you depressed? I didn't know that. And then if they say yes, you ask outright, are you suicidal? If they say not really or don't worry about it, that's not okay. That's considered a maybe. And a maybe is always taken as a yes. And then you ask, do you have a plan? And if they have a plan, you get them help ASAP. You don't wait. And this has happened many times. I've taught for 12 years. I mean, I had a student at Oakland Community College. Their security are police. This was a night class. A student confided in me after class. So it was like 9:30 at night. I'm still talking to him. And I called my mentor, who's a therapist, and she had me write a contract with him that he wouldn't harm himself. And I called in security, who are these trained police. And for 48 hours, he promised me he wouldn't hurt himself. And we called his sister and talked to her. I mean, it's heady stuff. Mm-hmm. So, so I told Lawrence Tech I had this piece out, and I thought, oh, now I'm going to find out, these horrible secrets. And instead, they had a suicide that fall, not on campus, but nonetheless, horrible. And they wanted me to talk about it. And I was going to speak in front of students at the new dorm, and my dad was dying. And I talked to a very close friend who said, you sure you're up for this? And I said, not really. And she said, well, why don't you wait to do it? Because I was going back and forth to Florida. And I said, you think it's okay to do that? And she said, yeah. So I prayed about it. And I'm not a religious person, but I do really try to look inward and do better. And I realized I can discuss this in the classroom. There was a natural segue to do that. So this is what came out of it. In the classroom, I mention my brother died by suicide. The room stops. In 10 years of teaching, I tell them, I have never said this before. Yet they lost one student this past fall, so the dean invites me to share what I wish I couldn't readily recall. bringing forth this brother now, and hours later too, to another class on this same industrial carpet where long formica tables stand in rows, as if order meant reason, the segue's natural as a river's artery. There is no rustling of paper. Even the leaves stop bobbing out the window. The fog lifted seconds ago. The frames are a still life. In backpack pockets, cell phones emit waves insensate. I've introduced them to Septimus Smith and Virginia Woolf herself and Anja Spiegelman, whose photo they have seen only once, but know mostly only as a mouse. Mental illness is just that, an illness. An addiction is just that. For years, I took such illness as a personal affront. Depression, addiction, inexorably joined. Rocks in her pockets, walk in the water. Let me know, I say. Ask, I tell them. When someone's depressed, ask the question, be specific. Are you suicidal? Remember, not really is a maybe. Anything other than a no is a maybe. And a maybe is a yes. A maybe is always a yes.
It's good to have these conversations and get this kind of information out. I definitely appreciate your correction of the kind of communal nature of substance abuse and mental health. I definitely think that's something we should address as a culture, as well as in the family zone. You know, it's a very problematic, you know, in general for you're correct in that. In fact, it's like there's this dopamine fix going on, constantly wanting the new device, wanting, you know, we're constantly struggling to get the next fix, you know, and it's like there is definitely something in consumerist culture that is encouraging that kind of, you know, stubborn tendency to just want to have this momentary pleasure.
And if you take a look at that, you look at someone, let's say, who earns, I'm making it up, but say $600,000 a year or $2 million and is working all the time. And his whole or her whole life is off kilter, right? Because where's the time to connect to people? And then you look at what happened, say, with Denmark during World War II, where every Danish citizen watched out for the next. They only lost 77 people to the Holocaust who died because the whole country, one by one, individually watched out for the next person. And what would happen here if instead of having fear and that external, therapists call it the external locus of control, if we started saying, oh, you know what? This doesn't feel right. I don't really need that. I need this. And what we need might not be tangible. There's a story. I love the story, and I don't remember where I read it. It might have been Joseph Telushkin, who's a rabbi, but I'm not sure. And it's about a very prominent rabbi in Europe who was a big deal. And a very important businessman went to visit him. And the rabbi lived in the basement. And in his living room, he had a table and 2 chairs. And the visitor said, where's your furniture? Thinking, you know, he was going to live in a beautiful, very impressive house. And the rabbi said, where's your furniture? And the visitor said, I'm traveling. And the rabbi said, so am I. So, you know, what's it really about? Hopefully connection, right?
Right.
So you know, I don't want people to think this book is all negative, because there's
it's definitely, you want a good balance, and as you said at the beginning, you know, a good sense of humor is a credential to a good friendship and a good poetry collection as well. I think it's good to have a good a balance of, you know, telling the truth and sometimes being very dark and scary and you know, people are afraid of it, versus, you know, a good sense of humor about these things where you can simultaneously laugh at and you know, and kind of remember that life is not all this burden and dark stuff.
Not only is life not all this burden and dark, life is mostly wonderful as long as you have enough food to eat and you're living in relative peace and safety, right? It's wonderful. So, you know, I have a couple really celebratory poems. My very favorite poem is about my daughter when she was a baby. It's not funny, but I think what I'm gonna read is the last poem because it's not funny, but it talks about how remarkable life is when you look at it up close.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this photograph that was taken in Indonesia of a grasshopper and the grasshopper's shell. The grasshopper was molting, and they
Mm-hmm.
were both hanging. And it's called ecdysis, which is the process of shedding. That's the scientific term.
Okay.
Ecdysis. In Indonesia, photographs are shot of the bright green grasshopper molting from her ghostly shell, dangling from a hairy stem. Emerging from her milky replica, that sheer articulated exoskeleton, luminescent in the sun, she hangs together with her former sheath, upside down and side by side, until her newest self is dried.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today, Cindy. It's been a very pleasant but very deep conversation, as you said. It's definitely good to get some knowledge about things out there. A lot of people may be uncomfortable with these topics, but I think it's good to discuss them. I think it's very I won't say pleasant, as I said, but it's deep and thoughtful. And it's good that people are viewing and listening in and getting an idea of what the book is about. If they want to pick up a copy, I guess Finishing Line Press has it on their website. I'm assuming.
Yeah, and it's in bookstores and you can get it online. And I think the thing that's so important to me that I just want to add, because we
Okay.
really did talk about some serious stuff, is that if you do the work, life is it's the biggest gift.
Absolutely.
But people need help getting through those hard times. And we have to be there for each other. Nothing is more valuable than each other.
I totally agree. I think that's a very apt observation. And we get together, have celebrations, have wonderful laughter, and tell each other jokes, and just enjoy life and have a wonderful time. Sometimes that's what we need to do. This wonderful anthology, The Literary Parrot, is now available as of August 1st. 249 pages of literature. So if you guys out there haven't seen this copy yet, seen this book, it's a wonderful book. You guys got to get a copy of it as soon as possible. I know you want a copy. I know everybody out there is looking for this. It's been on the Amazon bestseller list for roughly 2 weeks now. So if you haven't got a copy, then please do pick up a copy. It's a Literary Parrot Series 1. We'll have Series 2 in December. So be on the lookout for that. And definitely thank you, Cindy, for joining us today. We've had a wonderful discussion, very serious discussion. And I hope that you will keep selling copies of your book. And we'll look forward to that. And thanks to Leah Maines at Finishing Line Press. She's been a wonderful support for this program. And I hope that she continues to send us people her way, her authors, and as well as her poets and her fiction writers. So thank you for joining the Literary Parrot today. I'm Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host. This has been a great conversation with Cindy Frenkel, who we discussed some very deep subject matter. It's very important that we address a lot of these social issues as social issues. And thank you all who have viewed this program today. And I'm Dustin Pickering, signing off from the Literary Parrot, NewYorkParrot.com.